Hi, I'm Steve and welcome to my kitchen. Today I want to demonstrate how to make caraway rye bread.
Like this. This is a rustic rye bread that is sure to please your family and friends. I'll be using 2 cups bread flour, 1 cup rye flour, 1 tablespoon sugar, 1½ teaspoons salt, 1/4 teaspoon instant yeast, 2 tablespoons caraway seeds, 1 tablespoon extra virgin olive oil, and 13 ounces cool tap water. I use a blend of bread and rye flour. Rye flour has a lower percentage of gluten, which will give the loaf a dense texture. Blending gives the bread balance. I set up my workspace with my utensils and my ingredients. I'm going to start with the dry ingredients. 2 cups bread flour. I use the scoop and shake method for measuring my flour. This recipe is very forgiving, and you don't have to be exact. 1 cup rye flour, 1 tablespoon sugar, 1½ teaspoons salt. I use a heaping teaspoon to get my teaspoon and a half. 1/4 teaspoon instant yeast, sometimes referred to as bread machine yeast. And 2 tablespoons caraway seeds. Before we add the wet ingredients, I want to mix the dry ingredients to ensure that the salt, sugar, yeast, and caraway seeds are evenly distributed throughout the flour. Now the wet ingredients. 1 tablespoon extra virgin olive oil. And 13 ounces cool tap water. If I added all 13 ounces to the dough would be harder to mix. So I'll add 12 ounces now and 1 ounce later. Can you see how dry the dough is? I'll add 1 more ounce. The last ounce will wet the outside of the dough ball and pick up the remaining flour.
All we need to do now is cover the bowl with plastic wrap, leave it on the counter to proof overnight, and Mother Nature will do the kneading for us. I'll see you in the morning.
No-knead dough should be proofed for 8 to 24 hours, which gives you a lot of flexibility. You can make the dough in the morning and bake it for your evening meal. Or you can make the dough in the evening, bake the next morning, and have oven fresh bread for your lunch. The dough has proofed overnight and more than doubled in size. It's time to fold, shape, and proof the dough a second time. Bakers have known for years that bread benefits from long proofing times. The no-knead method takes advantage of this principle. It uses a minimum amount of yeast and long proofing times to develop flavor. Meanwhile, the long proofing times replaces the arduous task of kneading. Mother Nature does the kneading for you. There are a variety of baking vessels you can use. I enjoy Caraway rye bread in long narrow loaves, and I'll be using a long baker. So I set 2 sheets of parchment paper and 2 olive trays off to the side of my workspace. I'll show you how this works. I'll start by lightly dusting the workspace with flour and scraping the dough out of the bowl. Its stringy nature tells us Mother Nature has done her job. With floured hands, I'm going to lightly pat the dough to flatten, then using a plastic bowl scraper, I'll fold the dough over onto itself, forming a ball. Next, I'll cut the dough in half and form each into a long loaf by rolling the dough in flour. The flour will help give the loaf its rustic appearance. Okay, this is how it works. I'll use the parchment paper as a sling to move the dough to the olive tray. Then the olive tray will help shape the dough during proofing. I've placed the dough on the parchment paper and covered it with a flour sack towel to proof. Before I leave the kitchen, I'll prep the oven. I've positioned the rack in the lower part of the oven and inserted the baking vessel. I do it in advance so I don't forget. I'm going to proof the dough for an hour and a half, and I want to preheat the oven for half an hour, so I'm setting the timer for 1 hour. Dough should be proofed for 1 to 2 hours and the oven should be preheated. It's been 1 hour and I'm setting the oven to 450 degrees, and I'll reset the timer for an additional 30 minutes.
The dough has been proofing for an hour and a half and the oven is preheated. It's time to bake the bread.
Okay, all we need to do now is pick the dough up using the parchment paper as a sling and put it into the baker. And it's ready for the oven. Next, I'll set the timer for 25 minutes. See you then. The bread should be baked for 25 minutes with the lid on the clay baker, then 3 minutes with the lid off to finish the crust. After 25 minutes, I took the top off and reset the timer for an additional 3 minutes.
I took the first loaf out of the oven and repeated the process for the second loaf. Second loaf is ready to come out. Let's take a look.
Well, what do you think? This is a gorgeous loaf. Notice how rolling it in flour gave it a nice rustic look. I hope you found this video informative. I also have a selection of cookbooks. I listed the titles and a brief description of each cookbook in this video's description. They start at 99 cents. Thanks for watching.